A Karen panics at the sight of my traditional garment and phone charger, accusing me of being a terrorist and calling the police. Here's what happened. It almost doesn't end well for me. So, it was a Friday, right? Just got out of the mosque after the Friday prayer, feeling spiritually recharged and peaceful. For those who don't know, Friday prayer is an important part of our religion, Islam, and it's called Jummah. It's a time when Muslims gather at the mosque, listen to a sermon, and perform a special prayer together. I'm a 19-year-old Muslim guy, and on this particular day, I decided to wear my thobe, a traditional ankle-length garment. Because why not? It's comfortable, and I was going straight to university afterward. I didn't have time to change into my usual jeans and hoodie, but I thought it wouldn't be a big deal. Little did I know. As I walked to the bus stop, I noticed a woman sitting there with her 2 kids, probably around 10 and 12 years old. She had that typical, I want to speak to the manager haircut, and she was eyeballing me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. I could tell she was an Islamophobe, but I tried to brush it off, thinking it wouldn't escalate any further. So I'm waiting for the bus, minding my own business, when I reach into my backpack to grab my phone. I had a portable battery pack with me to charge it since it was running low. The battery pack was a bit chunky, and I guess it caught the woman's attention. As I'm plugging in my phone, I hear the dreaded "excuse me" from behind me. I turn around and there she is, the Karen, staring daggers into my soul. "Yeah?" I asked, trying to keep my cool. "What's that in your hand?" she demanded, with an accusatory tone. I looked at the battery pack and then back at her, puzzled. "It's a battery pack, to charge my phone?" She didn't look convinced. "It looks like a bomb," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with fear. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? It's just a battery pack." At this point, the situation was getting out of hand. The other people at the bus stop were starting to stare, and her kids looked mortified, but Karen wasn't backing down. "I don't believe you. I'm calling the police," she yelled, pulling out her phone and dialing 911. I tried to tell her it was just a misunderstanding, but she wouldn't listen. The next thing I know, she's telling the operator that there's a terrorist at the bus stop. My heart sank, but I tried to keep my composure. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but I was aware of how situations like this could escalate. I just prayed that the police would understand. It felt like an eternity, but within minutes I saw flashing lights approaching. 2 police cars pulled up, and 4 officers stepped out, guns drawn. They yelled at me to drop the device and get on the ground. I complied, placing the battery pack on the ground and laying down with my hands behind my head. I could hear Karen smugly telling the officers that she knew something was wrong, and that she saved everyone from a potential attack. As the officers cautiously approached me, I tried to explain the situation, but they were understandably tense. One of them picked up the battery pack, examining it closely. Thankfully, they quickly realized it was just a charger and not a bomb. The officer who picked up the battery pack sighed, shaking his head. "Ma'am, this is just a battery pack, not a bomb. There's no threat here." Karen's face turned red and she stammered. But he's wearing that dress thing and he looks suspicious." The officer didn't seem impressed by her reasoning. "That dress thing is called a thobe, and it's a traditional garment. There's nothing suspicious about it." By now, the other officers had holstered their guns, and they helped me up from the ground. I was still shaking from the adrenaline, but I was relieved the situation was being resolved. One of the officers apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. We have to take these calls seriously, but it's clear that there's no threat here." I nodded, still trying to process what just happened. "I understand, but it's frustrating, I was just minding my own business, charging my phone." The officer agreed, giving Karen a stern look. "Ma'am, next time please be more certain before you make such serious accusations. You could have put an innocent person's life in danger." Karen, still red-faced and flustered, muttered an apology. The officers exchanged glances before deciding to take her information, explaining that they would file a report for misuse of the emergency services and that she may face penalties or fines for her actions. Karen's eyes widened in shock, realizing the gravity of her mistake. She quickly gathered her kids and rushed away from the bus stop, undoubtedly regretting her actions. As for me, I ended up missing my bus and being late for class, but I was just grateful that the situation didn't escalate any further. It was an eye-opening experience and a reminder that even in our modern diverse society, there's still a long way to go in terms of understanding and acceptance. So, that's my story of how a Karen mistook my battery pack for a bomb and almost got me arrested. I wish I could say it was an isolated incident, but I know many others have faced similar situations. OMG. OP. I cannot believe the level of craziness you had to deal with. That Karen was seriously off the rails. First, she goes all suspicious on you just because you're wearing a thobe, which, by the way, sounds super comfy. But then she takes it to a whole new level by freaking out over a battery pack. I mean, come on. And can you imagine her smug face when she thought she saved everyone from a potential attack? Karen, please. The officers handled it like champs, though, setting her straight and explaining that there was no threat at all. Karen's face turning red and her getting a stern lecture on not making false accusations was honestly a satisfying moment. But seriously, OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. You handled it with grace and patience, and I'm relieved the situation didn't escalate further. Entitled, Karen demands my seat on the train and claims that I'm faking my disability despite me showing her proof. She ends up throwing me off the seat. Thankfully, it doesn't end well for her. Here's what happened. So, I'm a 27-year-old male and I was on my way home from work on the public train after an exhausting day at the office. I had been born with a rare genetic condition called muscular dystrophy, which affected my muscles and joints, making it difficult for me to walk or stand for long periods of time. I had been using a wheelchair for most of my life, but on this day, I had decided to use a cane to give my arms a break. As I sat on the train, minding my own business, a woman approached me. She was an overweight woman, with blonde hair and a smug look on her face. If an army of Karens had a leader, she would be it. "Excuse me, but you're in my seat," she said in a haughty tone. I looked at her in confusion. I had been sitting in this seat for the past 10 minutes and no one had approached me to claim it. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name on this seat. I'm afraid you're mistaken," I replied calmly. The entitled woman had snorted in disbelief. "You're faking your disability," she accused. "You're too young to be disabled. Get out of my seat." I was taken aback by her words. I had been dealing with my condition for as long as I could remember, and I was used to the occasional rude comment or stare from strangers. But this was the first time someone had directly confronted me and accused me of faking my disability. "I'm sorry, but I have a legitimate disability. I'm not faking anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady but feeling the frustration starting to boil inside of me. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Prove it," she demanded. "Oh, I'll prove it all right." I reached into my bag and pulled out my disability ID card, which clearly stated my condition. "Here, see for yourself, I have muscular dystrophy and I am more entitled to this seat than you, woman," I said, holding out the card for her to see. Karen snatched the card out of my hand and examined it briefly before tossing it back at me. "This could be fake. I know you youngsters lie a lot nowadays. You could have gotten this from anywhere. Get out of my seat," she demanded again, her voice raising in volume. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I also didn't want to be pushed around by this entitled Karen. I looked around the train, hoping for some support from the other passengers, but most of them were either avoiding eye contact or pretending not to notice the situation. "I'm not moving from this seat. This is my seat, and I have a legitimate disability. If you have a problem with it, you can talk to the train conductor or security," I said, trying to stay calm but firm. Karen's face turned red with anger. "I'm not going to talk to anyone. I'm the one who deserves this seat, not you. You're just a lazy faker who wants to take advantage of the system," she spat out. I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. How could someone be so ignorant and rude? I looked at her with a mix of pity and disbelief, but before I could say anything else, she started to argue with me. "I deserve this seat because my legs are tired and I need to sit down," she said, her voice getting louder and more agitated. "You're just taking up space and pretending to be disabled. You're a scam artist and you don't deserve this seat. Move out of my way or I'll make you move." I was stunned by her words and her behavior. I had never encountered someone so entitled and rude before. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I also didn't want to be pushed around by this woman. I looked around the train again, hoping for some support from the other passengers, but most of them were still avoiding eye contact or pretending not to notice the situation. "I'm not moving from this seat. This is my seat, and I have a legitimate disability. If you have a problem with it, you can talk to the train conductor or security," I repeated, trying to stay calm but firm. Karen snorted in disbelief. "You're not going to get anyone to help you. You're just a lazy faker who wants to take advantage of the system. I'm entitled to this seat and you're not going to stop me from taking it," she said, her voice getting louder and more aggressive. I could feel the anger and frustration building inside of me. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I also didn't want to be pushed around by this entitled Karen. I looked at her with a mix of pity and disbelief, but before I could say anything else, she reached out and pushed me off the seat. I fell to the ground, landing hard on my knees. I let out a gasp of pain, feeling the shock and anger coursing through my body. I looked up at Karen, who was staring down at me with a triumphant smile on her face. "See, you're not disabled. You can get up and walk away. Get out of my seat, she said, her voice filled with smug satisfaction. Just as I was about to stand up and move to another seat, a bystander intervened. Hey, calm down, you beach. This man has a legitimate disability, and he has every right to sit in this seat, the bystander said, stepping between Karen and me. Karen turned her wrath on the bystander, who refused to back down. You don't know anything. You're not the one who has to stand on these trains all day. I deserve this seat, not him, she yelled, getting more and more angry. The bystander, who turned out to be a young woman in her 20s, looked at Karen with a mix of pity and disgust. You're being ridiculous. This man has a legitimate disability, and he has every right to sit in this seat. If you have a problem with it, you can talk to the train conductor or security, she said, standing her ground. Karen, however, was not about to back down. She continued to argue and rant, getting more and more aggressive. The bystander, who had had enough, pulled out her phone and called security. Within minutes, 2 security guards arrived on the scene. They listened to both sides of the argument, and then looked at Karen's ID card. Ma'am, this man has a legitimate disability, and he has every right to sit in this seat. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will have to remove you from the train, one of the guards said, his voice firm but calm. Karen, who was now fuming with anger, started to swear at the guards and the bystander. You're all against me. You're all just a bunch of entitled bastards who think you can push me around. I'm not gonna stand for this. I'm gonna sue you all, and you'll be sorry, she yelled, getting more and more irate. The guards, who had clearly heard it all before, exchanged a look of resignation. They grabbed Karen by the arms and started to escort her off the train. Ma'am, you're under arrest for disturbing the peace and causing a disturbance. You have the right to remain silent, one of the guards said, reading her rights as they led her away. I was stunned by the whole ordeal. I couldn't believe that someone could be so entitled and rude to someone else, especially someone with a disability. I'm so grateful for the bystander who had intervened because without her, I probably wouldn't have got the justice I deserved. I don't like standing up for myself. I decided not to press charges against Karen because that stuff's a big hassle, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I watched her being led away in handcuffs. OMG, you guys, can you believe the audacity of this Karen? I mean, accusing our buddy OP of faking his disability? That's just next level entitlement. And the craziest part is when she straight up pushes him off the seat. Like, who does that? I'm glad she didn't get away with it, though. Shout out to that awesome bystander who intervened and helped our OP. But seriously, it's so infuriating that people like this Karen exist, who just think they're entitled to everything and have no empathy for others. Karen called the cops on me for buying the last PS5. I'd gone to the local Bullseye looking to pick up a few things with my cousin, Tom, for a long night of gaming, as neither of us had anything to do that Friday or Saturday night, and the then new COD, Vanguard, had just released. Not knowing how terrible this game was, we here hyped to get in as many hours as we could. As I carry my basket with balls, Doritos, and the biggest bag of pizza rolls I've ever seen, I happened to notice a singular PS5 sitting behind the glass in electronics. Walking up to Tom, I asked if he was planning on getting it, and he wasn't interested. He already has the new Xbox, so fair. I send Tom to fetch an employee so I can collect my overpriced prize, looking forward to those PS exclusives over the coming months. Everything goes swimmingly, and I've bought the PS5. No sooner than I grab the bag and pick it up, a woman approaches. We'll name her Susan, as she wasn't good enough at her craft to be dubbed Karen. Susan interjects the closing niceties between myself and the store clerk with a panicked, "Excuse me?" The three of us turn, and the store employee asks if he can help. Susan says no, that will not be needed, as she's looking to chat with me. I make sure she's aware I am not a member of the Bullseye staff. Susan confirms she knows this as her voice continues to feign sweetness. Susan says, "I see you have the last PS5 they have in stock. Were you going to buy that?" To which I responded, "Actually, I already did. I'm stoked to finally have one." Susan replies, No, you can't have it. I need it. I'll pay you double what you paid for it." Now look, if I hadn't just spent ages trying to track one of these new systems down, I'd have just sold it to her at cost, but I wasn't able to find an RTX 3080 Xbox Series or PS5 at this point, so no amount of money could have convinced me to part with it. I inform Susan, and she is absolutely not having it. All of the feigned sweetness instantly gone, she demands I give her the PS5. Store employee interjects, telling Susan if she continues to harass customers, he will have to ask her to leave. Susan turns and says, "I don't care what you say, I'm going to get that PlayStation." However, I did use this moment to slip Susan and make a break for the exit. Reaching my car, and just as we are pulling out of the space, we spot Susan running. Thinking nothing of it, I drop it into drive and putter to the exit. About a mile to a mile and a half after leaving Bullseye, I hear frantic honking from behind and look up. If you guessed I saw Susan in her BMW SUV tailgating and swerving all over the highway, you'd be correct. Other than laughing with Tom, I ignored her entirely. Roughly 10 minutes pass, and she's still right there in my ass when I hear sirens and notice the telltale cherries and berries of a state police cruiser directly behind Susan. Rejoice. However, Susan pulls to the right lane, and the officer continues on. Now, he is directly on my bumper, and he's laying on the air horn, being super obnoxious. So I pull over, and yep, he's there for me. Susan had also pulled over behind the officer, though I hadn't noticed. The officer approaching and treated me like a possible DUI and explained they had received a call about my vehicle swerving all over the road and driving at erratic speeds. After a couple of back and forth, he was convinced everything was fine and started to tell me to have a nice day when Susan out of nowhere screams, "Officer, arrest this man! He stole my PS5! I explained to the officer that I had bought the PS5 at Bullseye and what had happened with Susan. The officer was extremely confused, but could see the PS5 sitting on the back seat within the car. He asked if I could prove that it was mine and that I did in fact pay for it, to which Susan said, "Absolutely not. He knows I bought it, and he grabbed it in the parking lot. Thank God you're here, officer." So having worked retail many years ago, I knew that my card number would be on the receipt. So I opened with, "Well, I also have the receipt, if that helps." Which Susan, the dim-witted bird she was, immediately jumped on, stating that I had stolen that out of her hands too. This is where I proudly exclaimed that all receipts show the last 4 digits of the card used to purchase things, as well as the first initial and last name of the cardholder. Susan continued to state, "Yeah, and my name is on it." I pulled my driver's license, bank card, and receipt out, handing them to the officer. Everything matched. The officer hands them back thanking me and immediately turns to Susan, who is now screaming, "Well, aren't you going to arrest him for being drunk? He was all over the road." Officer replies, "So you're the one who called us about a possible DUI?" Susan proudly exclaimed, "Yes, now arrest him!" The officer immediately pulled out his handcuffs and slapped them on Susan as she, with a voice full of fear, asked what the hell he was doing. Officer explained that Susan was under arrest for making a false report, misuse of 911, and my state's law on stalking. Now, while I got this wonderful PS5, Susan got her car towed, the full weekend in lockup, and when the dust finally settled, she pleaded guilty to making a false police report and harassment. I don't know what the terms were, but she was put on a 2-year probation and banned from the local Bullseye until it is completed. You're a lucky guy, dude. I mean, it's pretty crazy that you had someone attempt to steal your PS5 and then manage to get them in cuffs without actually contacting the police yourself. I'm really glad you got some officers that did their job properly and checked everything out. Then, on top of that, did the right thing by not going easy on Susan, as she needs to be taught a lesson. Enjoy your time on the PS5. I'm sure it wasn't easy for you to secure it. Anyways, check out this next video where a Karen says, "I can't fly first class because I'm black." Yeah, just wild.